Okay, today we're going to have a look at Slaves to Darkness. This is an army that I actually play, so I'll have a bit more of an understanding about how the army used to work and how their rules have changed since the previous edition, and hopefully a bit better an insight than perhaps the armies I don't play. But no reason to delay. I guess we'll get straight into it. We'll look at their battle traits. So we have Eye of the Gods. It's a once per turn end of any turn. Each friendly Slaves to Darkness unit that destroyed an enemy unit this turn is a target. Friendly beasts and non-hero monsters cannot be targeted by this ability. Effect, make a reward roll of d6 for each target and apply the corresponding effect below. You can re-roll the reward roll for the target, but if you do so and you roll a 1, inflict d3 mortal damage on the target. Okay, so one thing that's worth noting here, I suppose, is that you, the player, use the ability and you target your units with it. It's not the units themselves using the ability. I suppose the other thing is it doesn't matter how many units that your unit destroys. It's only the one roll. So if your Baron Guard uses like fight twice and you've got 6 of them, it's got a lot of damage output and it kills 2 units in the one turn, it's still only going to roll 1 die on the Eye of the Gods table. And we've got a built-in reroll now, which is much nicer. It used to be quite a big chart, and it was like different for heroes and for units. Now it's a smaller, simpler chart and probably a better chart, but it's the same for heroes and units. And having that built-in reroll really helps. You used to have to take one of the ensorcel banners, and it was by far the worst efficiency. You used to have to take a mark to get your units, like you'd have to mark them as undivided to be able to roll on the chart, and you were sort of trading a guaranteed good buff like the Mark of Nurgle or the Mark of Khorne for the potential at an okay buff. Most of the table was really weak. There was really only one option that was good for units, which was the increased rend. So it was very hard to justify marking your units as undivided. So you didn't really get to use this Eye of the Gods thing except on heroes. And when you did use it on heroes, there were still a lot of useless and bad effects. So they've cleaned this up a lot. The effects here are 1, no effect, 2, heal 3 the target, 3, add 1 to hit rolls, 4, just combat attacks, but we don't have any shooting in the army for the rest of the battle. 4, the target has a ward of 6+ for the rest of the battle. If the target already has a ward 6+, it has a ward 5+ instead. This already cleans up one of the problems with the previous chart. It was possible to get a 6-up ward and possible to get a 5-up ward or to get multiple instances of a 6-up ward. They've made sure that all the things here are kind of cumulative. Obviously, if you get 3 of this effect, then you are wasting it, but it's very hard to get 3 of the same one effect, especially without like choosing it. So 5 is add 1 to the rend characteristic of the target's melee weapons. And then 6, you get to pick any one of those effects. So this is a much better chart than the old one. It has a much higher chance of doing something. Basically on a 3-up, you are successful and something good happens. The 2 is often nothing because a lot of the times when you're rolling, you're not even damaged. I missed this the first time I read it. It's actually just heal 3. I feel like it used to only heal D3. So even when you rolled the annoying sad effect, it didn't even heal much. And I still think it's a bit unfortunate that we have these dead effects because there's already a precondition to roll on the chart. Even if you use, for example, like a Demon Prince, the Demon Prince has to roll a 3-up to let you roll on the chart. So you have to pass 2 rolls, and I feel like that's not necessary. They could have just said, well, if you fulfill the condition, you get some sort of bonus. And on the Demon Prince, if they thought, well, rolling on a 3-up that lets you roll on this chart, that's too good, then they could have just made it a 4-up or something like that. They could have made that effect not as powerful or not as likely, and then made the chart not have these dud options in it. I really don't think they need them just because it's double conditioning. It seems like I can understand when they design this. It feels like they need to put in some version of like the gods are displeased, but basically the gods are displeased every time you don't destroy a unit, right? That's being snubbed by the gods. They're not interested in you unless you destroy a unit. If you destroy a unit, then you get some benefits, right? I feel like that makes a bit more sense. Having these things on here is like a double negative that stacks up. But putting in the reroll means this happens a lot less. It still happens 1 in 9 times, to be fair, because it's like a 1 in 3 chance that you get either snubbed or mutative regrowth, and then you do the reroll and you get snubbed or mutative regrowth again. So 1 in 9 that happens, and then pretty low chance, I think it's 1 in 18, that you'll get, like assuming that you get 1 or a 2 and then you re-roll it and the next roll is a 1, I think that's 1 in 18. And you'll deal the D3 mortal wounds to you. That doesn't happen very often. But yeah, still very unfortunate that there's these dud options. I don't mind having this in the table because it's quite nice when you roll the 6, if you need the heal at that moment, that you could pick it. But it would be nice if, I don't know, maybe it healed you immediately and then at the end of every turn or at the start of every hero phase, you healed 1 wound or something. It gave you an ongoing and persistent effect like these other ones. But overall, this chart is greatly improved. I think it's much easier to get good effects. Even this used to be, I think it was just +1 to charge on Unnatural Grace, which +1 to charge is probably a better buff now than it used to be and a rarer buff now than it used to be. But add 1 to hit rolls is still really applicable across a lot of the army, even though we hit on 3s on most units. And being able to get this 5-up ward is really neat. I think the way this interacts with the Sorcerer Lord, we'll see. Actually, I'll talk about that when I get to his War Scroll. But there is an interaction there where it's a little bit confusing. And there's an interaction with the Demon Prince. The Demon Prince has a 6-up ward base because he's a demon. So he can, if he rolls the 4, he can go straight to the 5-up, which is kind of neat, just the way this is worded. So overall, really, really nice. It's got an inclusion down the bottom. The same effect can be applied multiple times to a unit, and more than one effect can apply to the unit at the same time. That's really neat because there is a restriction in the core rules around being affected by the same passive effect. You can't be affected by the same passive effect more than once. I'm not sure if this is worded in the right way, that the can actually overcomes the can't in the core rules, but it's pretty clear what the intent here is. So if it wasn't, then the errata would fix it anyway. Overall, this is actually very fun. The main downside of the ability is that you have to be successful first. We lost Chaotic Conduit, and the Chosen no longer get their just the roll on the chart at the start of the game. We still do have the command trait, but it's not the best command trait, especially because you have that 1 in 9 chance of literally nothing happening, but also because the buffs that you get are like these sorts of buffs on a hero are not going to be fantastic buffs because the heroes you can give command traits to are not that big, right? The big scary monsters in Chaos are all named characters. All of the generic heroes are kind of like the Chaos Lord on Karkadrak or a Demon Prince, which are not that impressive to the point where these things are that scary to get. So anyway, decent ability, lots going for it, and lots to say about it. So, what is it? Eye of the Gods. Big Casino. Still has duds. All right, so much better than before, especially because of this reroll. That's doing a lot of work, and you can use it in either turn, which is very nice. It'd be very sad if they made it only work on your turn. Okay, and then we've got Marks of Chaos. This one, this is sort of essential for a Chaos army, for the Slaves to Darkness army, but it really doesn't feel much like a battle trait. It feels a lot more like a War Scroll thing. Your units just sort of have a passive effect each. And the big problem here is that some of these are quite a lot better than other ones. So, for each of your Slaves to Darkness units, they get to have one of the following effects based on the Mark of Chaos keyword they have. Most of them you get to pick one of them, but some of them, mostly the named characters and all of the like Dark Oath guys, the weaker guys, tend to be undivided. I think the Gaunt Summoner is forced into Tzeentch. But other than that, you get to pick. And the keywords are undivided, add 1 to wound rolls for the unit's combat attacks that target a hero or monster. Khorne, add 1 to the attack's characteristic of the unit's melee weapons for the rest of the turn if the unit charged in the same turn. Tzeentch, the unit has a ward 4+ against mortal damage inflicted by spell abilities and abilities used by manifestations. And Nurgle, subtract 1 from wound rolls for combat attacks that target the unit. And Slaanesh, add 1 to run rolls and charge rolls for the unit. If the unit with the Mark of Chaos keyword is replaced, the replacement unit has the same Mark of Chaos keyword. Okay, this is a nice little inclusion because there is a subfaction that you can replace units, and they have things like the undivided keyword. I'm not sure if there's ways to replace anyone else because the undivided one, that's on their war scroll, but if it does come up for whatever reason, these guys that you pick the thing for, you don't get to pick a new one or whatever. It's just consistent, which I think makes sense. So the big issue is that Nurgle is much better than the other abilities here. Undivided used to be very bad to take, and this is a much improved version. Undivided is actually useful now. Most of the war scrolls in the army hit on 3s and 3s, so adding 1 to wound is fine. Adding 1 to attacks is quite good as well. A lot of the war scrolls have 2 or 3 attacks each, so adding 1 to the attack characteristic actually does improve the damage output by a significant amount. And they often have really high quality attacks like Varangard and Chosen and things like that. So Khorne's a viable option. It plays in the same space as Undivided, which I think is a bit unfortunate, having like 2 direct combat bonuses. And the fact that Undivided is, it's like situational is a bit annoying. But I think the design that's happening here is you're not really supposed to pick Undivided as a mark. I think you're just supposed to have Undivided on certain units, like those Dark Oath units, or people like Be'lakor, and I think Abraxia might be Undivided as well as default. And in those cases, you just get 1 to wound rolls in this situation. It's a neat little extra buff that all of these guys sort of have, and I think that is a narrative thing that's meant to speak to the sort of heroic units in the army, seeking out and destroying the enemy's heroes and monsters and that sort of thing. So it doesn't fuss me too much that this is situational because it's almost just built into the war scrolls of certain units. Most of the time, if you want a unit to deal damage and you're picking one of these, you'll just pick Khorne because it's more generic. You're not going to have units, you're not going to have situations where your enemy is using an infantry unit or a cavalry unit and you really need to kill them and you just can't because you've picked Undivided. You'll pick Khorne because then it's not matchup dependent. It's just like your positioning and your gameplay will determine whether or not you can get that +1 attack. Tzeentch is almost useless. Most spells that are good are spells that buff friendly units. The ones that are good that target enemy units generally debuff those units, so they reduce their characteristics in some way or their rolls or something like that. And then the weakest types of spells are the ones that deal mortal damage. And in particular, the funny thing about this is it's not the case that all the spells deal mortal damage now. In the past, spells were pretty exclusively about dealing mortal damage, but now manifestations actually deal normal damage as well. They have normal attacks and deal normal damage, and you don't get the ward in that situation either. So this is for like third-rate spells. Literally, you've got first-rate are the buffs that target friendlies, second-rate are the debuffs that target enemies, and then third-rate are like the damage-dealing spells. And it doesn't even handle all of them. It only handles the mortal damage inflicted by those spells. Tzeentch is very situational, and the thing that made up for it in the past, Tzeentch used to have a terrible mark effect, but it gave you a spell as well. You used to be able to teleport your Tzeentch units using a spell called Warp Reality. And it was the spell that was good, offset by the fact the mark was really bad. Khorne and Nurgle had good mark effects, but really bad abilities that they gave you in addition. Slaanesh is in a similar boat to Tzeentch here. Adding 1 to run rolls and charge rolls is not very good. It's not bad, and like I mentioned earlier, it's much harder to get buffs to charging. and there are some specific combinations, like the Karkadrak Lord gives you +2 to charge. So if you have Slaanesh as well, you've got +3 to charge. You can use things like the Soul Scream Bridge or the Gaunt Summoner to teleport your units, and then you can use things like the Karkadrak Lord and the Slaanesh Mark to make sure you can guarantee those charges. So it's not useless. There is a place for it. There's a strategy where you can put some combination of units together and charge out of a setup, but comparing it to Khorne and Nurgle, it's very situational and very hard to use. The advantage of Slaanesh used to be that it gave you a command that let the unit run and charge. The reason I'm bringing this they had some second element, and all of those second elements are gone. Each of the marks had a command or a spell associated with it. I think what's happened is that's mostly moved over to the War Shrine. The War Shrine did used to have effects like this, depending on what mark it was, and it still does, and some of those effects are quite strong. And for the Slaanesh mark in particular, the War Shrine gives you a 3d6 charge, which is huge and really powerful, but it means you have to play the War Shrine, which is an ancient and ugly model that shouldn't exist. So I have a bit of a bugbear with it. I don't entirely hate the design, but having part of your, essentially the way I look at it is, part of your battle traits are locked behind this unit, and in particular the fact that it's a pretty horrible unit. It's at least a bit of a controversial unit, I suppose. That, in my opinion, is a bit of a bad decision. Otherwise, this is quite good. Being able to put your whole army on -1 to wound, that's very good. I think they could have done a better job in this space of making the decisions matter a bit more. Even things like with Slaanesh, the chariots used to have a built-in run and charge once per game, I think, maybe. And so having Slaanesh on the chariots, they also had impact hits that worked off the charge distance that you rolled, and it counted the modified distance. So it was natural to sort of add 1 to run and charge rolls for those chariots. You would still consider things like -1 to wound and whatever. There were other options that were useful, but it there was a synergy somewhere in the book, whereas I can't see much of that when I look through the book. It's mostly just you'll take Nurgle on pretty much everything. Maybe you'll take Khorne on some of the heavy hitter units in your army, like the Baron Guard, and then you have to take Undivided on some other units, and you pretty much never touch Tzeentch. There's a rare situation where you take Slaanesh for that setup charge thing, and maybe to make your counter charges a little more reliable, maybe. There's a small situation there as well. Okay. So I think the big problem is just that they're not equal. Marks of Chaos. So not even Steven. Noble is much better. And because it's all opportunity cost, this really warps the perspective. Undivided and play in the same space a bit. Tzeentch. I'm probably spelling Tzeentch wrong. Okay. So, for marking, do we have useful abilities? I think I'm going to go 2 out of 3 here. These are maybe a little bit, there's some little bits of awkwardness, like the fact that you have to destroy something first to get your ability here. That's probably going to lose them the point there. But overall, this is pretty practical. This is useless. The fact Tzeentch is not very useful. But you don't have to pick Tzeentch. So I guess they do have kind of pretty useful abilities. Overall, battle tactics, useful. Are they interesting? I don't think the marks are particularly interesting. They're pretty generic things, but they make up some points in Eye of the Gods. I think Eye of the Gods is pretty interesting. So I'll give them a 3 there, even though I think this is bland beyond belief. This I find very interesting and very fun as a sort of thing. I guess this is really not fun. Actually, I'm going to be harsh. We're going to go 2 out of 3. It's not fun that you can successfully destroy the unit or successfully roll on your Demon Prince roll or whatever. You get to roll on the Eye of the Gods and then nothing happens. That sucks. I really don't like that. So there are some like, actually, we'll go 3. That's this. It's the feels bad or non-bow elements. I think there's definitely some feels bad and non-bow in here. There's like, feels bad to take Tzeentch, especially if you have like a thematic reasons why you like it. And we get -2. So that's, we get -2 because Tzeentch is useless. I think I'll forgive Slaanesh and Undivided. They're not useless. It's a bit, they could have done something a bit different with these things, or actually kind of like Undivided, because most armies have heroes or monsters. It's just that it doesn't serve a tactical role for your army to target heroes and monsters. This is a big problem I have with the situationality in Warhammer design. There's a lot of abilities in the game where your damage in particular cares about the type of target that you're fighting, but there's no consistency about what that target is. So there's no special reason when I'm designing a Slaves to Darkness army, I don't look at my army and think, oh, this army is going to struggle to deal with heroes and monsters in particular, so I'm going to need to take some Undivided Mark to cover that weakness, for example. There's never a situation where ahead of time, during that list building process, I'm looking at these tools and thinking, this is a gap in my army. And maybe it would if they leaned even more into the design. And if you looked through the book of Chaos and they had a whole bunch of anti-infantry stuff and maybe a whole bunch of anti-cavalry stuff, but they really lacked the anti-hero and anti-monster sort of abilities, then Undivided would be a way to fill that gap a little bit. And you had to have like a dedicated, this is your unit that you use to kill heroes and monsters. You've got an Undivided Varangard unit or something. You bring them along because you want to destroy heroes and monsters, and then a lot of your other stuff deals with the other things. That's a potential design space, but I'm not seeing it happen in Age of Sigmar at all. It just feels like they want to power down some of the abilities. They don't want to give you add 1 to wound rolls all the time. That would be an amazing buff to give. So they have to make it more situational to make it less powerful. And using situationality as a power reduction means that you make the game more swingy, kind of randomly. And I think that's a bad design choice. It should be intentional. It should be there, some sort of decision and building point that you're considering, oh, I need to deal with infantry because infantry are otherwise they're going to be like, the fact of infantry doing a certain thing is a big problem for this list that I've designed. So I need to bring along anti-infantry tools, just for instance. Anyway, I don't think that factors into the marking that much. I guess 2 out of 3. It's mostly non-bow free. It's just those dead rules in the Eye of the Gods, and then yeah, you've got -1 for that. So what do we got? 2, 5, 7, -2. We get 5 out of 9. So that's how the marking looks. I've got this inclusion in pretty much everything. You get negative points if you have useless abilities. It's a way of, the rules writers could, if they wanted to, publish 1,000 pages in a battle tome, and that would be a bad idea. In general, you want concise rules. So you want a few options, and I think things like for artifacts, having 3 options is a good number of options, but they should all be real options. They shouldn't be useless at all. So having any useless rules is very weird. Just don't have them. Why would you have them? If you feel like for lore reasons, you need to have another option for Tzeentch, then you have to find a way to make this rule not useless. Or you have to find a different way to represent Tzeentch. Maybe people don't get Tzeentch marks. Maybe Tzeentch does some other stuff that the other things don't do. Maybe there's a lore of Tzeentch or something. I don't know. But doing it this way, just having like, we don't really like Tzeentch or something, and so we're going to give them a bad mark. Not that that's necessarily what they're doing, but yeah, there's no excuse is what I'm getting at. There's no excuse to have bad rules. It is a negative thing that you have just flat bad rules in your game. So I'm including that in the marking. All right. Let's move on to battle formations. That has taken a long time. I do think Slaves to Darkness have some interesting battle traits, though. Some other armies have some worse stuff that's not worth talking about as much. All right. Battle formations. We have the God's Wrath Warband. I'm going to start here. Once per turn, army, end of your turn, pick an objective that is contested by any friendly units to be the target. Effect, place a defiled token next to the target objective, then roll a d3 for each enemy unit contesting an objective that has a defiled token. On a 2+, inflict an amount of mortal damage on that enemy unit equal to the roll. This thing is a little odd, but it does work. The fact that you only have to be contesting the objective, you don't have to control it, is very nice. So often what you'll do is charge onto an objective and fight some enemy units that are on it. It works well with the current Chaos battle tactic, which involves charging onto objectives, and then you can defile it, deal the d3 damage, and that might be enough damage to get you the objective. It happens in the same turn as well, so you get to charge onto the objective, place the defiled token, and roll the mortal wounds in the same turn. And I think if it didn't have all of those things going for it, this would be a very boring, very stupid ability. If you had to control the objective, or if you had to charge onto it, place it, and then in future turns, it would deal the d3, but not on the turn you do it, all of those things would make this ability really boring and slow and useless. But the fact that you get it on the turn that you charge, like on the turn, like that you're contesting it and you place the token, I think that actually makes it quite interesting and a bit useful. It's a little bit of extra damage that you can put in a lot of different situations, and over the course of a game, as you're fighting over objectives, it does add up, especially because it hits each enemy unit. It's not just pick one enemy unit. So there's a lot of ways that this scales quite well. It sticks on the objective, and you get to roll for each objective, and you get to roll for each enemy unit on each objective. It's actually kind of neat and a little bit of fun. I'm not sure. It feels kind of nurgly to me. They have this like sort of spreading disease and then dealing damage. So I guess there is a thematic thing that you can put onto it if you want to think about it that way. I don't really know how it has anything to do with. It seems sort of like Chaos just put graffiti and dark magic symbols or something. I don't really know their lore justification, but it's not a horrible ability to use. It doesn't incentivize any specific sort of army, I guess, is one thing that I don't love about it. There's no particular build, but it is nice to have, when you have these sorts of sets of things, it's nice to have a generic option that sort of works with everything as a catch-all if your other things are a bit too specific. So I suppose it's not too bad in that regard. So actually, it's called God's Wrath Warband, not Ironclad Assault. This is the one I think you'll take most of the time because of it sort of works nicely and is pretty generic. So contest, then do d3 mortals to each unit. Defiled objectives. I need a way of writing d3 on a 2+ that is fast because they use it so much. I might just write like d3 plus or d3 2+. I'll know what that means. So this is the generic option. You do only get to place one defile token per turn, but like because of all the other scaling things and stuff, it actually can add up to a fair bit of damage across the course of a game. And yeah, it's pretty neat. It also works. You never lose the defiled token. You just sort of, if your opponent is sitting on the objective, they just keep getting pinged damage. So it sort of pushes them off it and gives you lots of opportunities to get back on it for free. It's quite nice. The only thing I don't like about it is that end of your turn only. It would probably be a bit good if it was both turns, but it does mean that you don't get as many pings as you might initially think. Anyway, aside from that, you've got the Legion of Chaos, which has United in Darkness as a passive effect. While there is at least one friendly Warriors of Chaos hero and one other friendly Demon hero or Dark Oath hero on the battlefield, add to the control scores of friendly Slaves to Darkness units while they are contesting an objective that is wholly outside friendly territory. I think even if you took away... Firstly, this ability is really boring. It just adds control score and like has just a random sort of list building requirement. So you need a Warriors of Chaos and a Dark Oath hero, or a Demon and a Warriors of Chaos hero. It's not hard to fulfill that. I think most of the time you'll take like maybe Be'lakor and a Chaos Sorcerer Lord. So there's a lot of lists where this is an eligible option where you will get the thing. But 2 is not adding a ton of control score, and it only applies to objectives outside friendly territory, especially wholly outside friendly territory. There are battle plans where there are no objectives that are wholly outside friendly territory, like if they have territories that go up to the middle line and then there are objectives on the middle line, they're all partially in friendly territory. So there are like situations where this rule is just dead and useless, and that's a real feels bad. The fact that it's just adding control score is not very thematic or interesting in any way. And the fact that you don't have to particularly do anything to do it, you just sort of like take specific units in your army and then you just get this passive effect across the whole army. It doesn't lend to like a play style or anything in particular. I guess part of the play style is you want to protect those heroes a bit, kinda. I don't see how that's relevant to the army or builds into a playstyle that represents Slaves to Darkness in a thematic way. They're not really particularly interested in protecting their heroes, making sure that they have a Demon and a Warriors of Chaos hero, like diversity is our strength in Slaves to Darkness or something like that. I'm not sure exactly why this is the condition. It again just feels like they wanted a generic control score battle formation and then put a bunch of conditions on it so that it wasn't as powerful. But none of these conditions are interesting, and this is a totally boring ability in pretty much every way. So Snoozeville, it's going to be, what was it called? United in Darkness? No, it's the Legion of Chaos. 2 to control based on list choices and battle plan randomness. Boring and not very good. I think we want these things to have a dot point each. All right, the spoilers. I think this is one of the worst ones. So you get a once per turn army reaction. You declared a fight ability for a friendly Demon Prince unit, and it's used by the Demon Prince unit using that fight ability. Worth noting that it actually tells you, it has this little use by clause, which is kind of useful because a lot of abilities are used by a unit, but don't have a clause that says used by. They're just sort of in the text of the declare, for example. They just sort of say used by the unit, whereas they have this technology. They have like a specific templating to tell you who uses the ability to make it really clear, and they only use it on some abilities. I'm not sure why they've done that. Might just be the design process. They had it at some point and they ditched it at some other point, so that's on some and not on other things. But consistency would be nice there. So the Demon Prince, using the fight ability, uses it. Pick a friendly non-hero Slaves to Darkness monster or beast unit that has not used a fight ability this turn and is wholly within 12 inches of this unit to be the target. The target can be picked to use a fight ability immediately after the fight ability used by this unit has been resolved. And that's it. So it has the double fighties. And this might seem powerful if you don't know the units involved. Demon Princes are not premium damage dealers in the army. They don't deal a ton of damage. Non-hero Slaves to Darkness monsters and beasts is a very small list of units that is not very good and that don't do much damage. So I'll just jump down. Slaves. So if we want to have a look at this list, we've got Chaos Spawns, which are practically useless. You've got the Fomeroid Crusher, which is only a 150 point unit. The Mindstealer Sphinx, which is only 170 points, and most of its points go into an ability. Same with the Fomeroid, actually. These guys aren't units that have really powerful war scrolls, really powerful weapon profiles, I should say. They have like abilities that are kind of niche and a bit useful, but fighting one after the other does absolutely nothing for those units. Raptorics are like chaff. They do almost no damage. And then you've got the Slaughterbrute Soul Grinder, and I think the Mutalith Vortex Beast. Those things do a little bit more, but they are horrid units that look horrible. The Soul Grinder in particular is like a 40k unit that has cyber bits attached to it that doesn't in any way look like something that belongs in this edition. So maybe I'm a little biased because I hate that model. But yeah, on the other hand, we've got the Slaughterbrute and the Mutalith Vortex Beast. So these are really, in my mind, these are the only units that will use this. The Mutalith actually doesn't do that much damage in combat either. So when I look at this rule, it is like, if you fight with a Demon Prince unit, you can also fight with a Slaughterbrute that's standing nearby. Except Slaughterbrutes are like foot-going monsters. They're still only 240 points. They're not exactly... they're not anywhere near the generic monsters in other lists. They're not like zombie dragons or terrorgeists or something like that. They don't do enough damage. They don't move that fast. You can't really build an army out of them. And they're not very interesting either. And they're all, I'm pretty sure, all Khorne locked. So this is a very weird... It feels like when you read the ability, it's meant to be a Monster Mash list. But the ability doesn't do anything for most of the monsters in the army. And even if it did, it's a fights then fights ability. So most of those abilities, we've seen lots of them. All it lets you do, because you can choose the Slaughterbrute to fight anyway. You can just charge the Slaughterbrute and fight with it, like charge in with it, fight with it in the same turn, and fight first with it. The only advantage you get by using this ability lets you fight with a Demon Prince first. It's not a big advantage because Demon Princes are not stellar combat units. They're better than they used to be, but they're quite expensive. A big part of their benefit is that they've got some ability to let your units roll on either gods. Another big part of their benefit is that their battle profile is really open. If you look at the Demon Prince, they've got any Slaves to Darkness, as opposed to a lot of the other guys have Warriors of Chaos specifically. So this ability pretty much does nothing. And it does nothing because the people who designed the book don't understand the book at all. It would make a lot more sense if there were other big monsters, or if things like the Fomeroid Crusher were a much bigger, beefier profile. But those things just don't really exist in the book. And so this ability doesn't really do anything. And it didn't really do anything in the previous book either. And I think you can see this design philosophy happening. It's like when they're designing the new book, they have the old book and they're just trying to sort of copy what the old ability did, but change it to be a more 4th edition-y kind of rule. So they're using this fight activation and ability templating and stuff, and doing something that's still monstery, because that's what the old Despoilers thing did. But there's no room in this book for this subfaction. There was lots of good subfactions in the previous edition. Kabbalists was really good. Knights of the Empty Throne was really good. They're very, very unique, gave it a strong play style. If you wanted big mounted armies that move very quickly, you played Knights of the Empty Throne. If you wanted a big magic heavy army with lots of foot heroes and lots of casts, you played Kabbalists. You could take these big reinforced blocks in the Host of the Everchosen because you got a better rally, and you got more Ensorcelled Banners. So if you had big reinforced units, you would get more out of the Ensorcelled Banner, and you would have more opportunity to use the 5-up rally. there was like specific play styles that the battle formations in the previous Chaos book supported. They were very interesting, very fun battle formations, and it would be fun to make lists in each one. And the thing that stood out was that Despoilers was a useless set of rules that was designed for a set of war scrolls that didn't exist in the book. It did a whole bunch of weird stuff, required you to take Demon Princes, which were quite bad. I think they're still too expensive, but the war scroll is actually good. So if the points come down on Demon Princes, this could have been good, except it requires Demon Princes and monsters, and the monsters are bad. So it like does nothing. That's the whole problem. So we got spoilers. Spoiled. It does nothing. No monsters. Very sad. And then we've got the Dark Oath Horde. I think this one's okay as an enabling thing. Lets you play a specific kind of army and actually might be okay otherwise. So once per turn, army, your movement phase, you can use Rally the Tribes. Declare if there is a friendly Dark Oath hero on the battlefield, pick a friendly non-hero, non-unique Dark Oath unit that has been destroyed to be the target. Roll a dice on a 3-up, set up a replacement unit with half the number of models from the target unit rounding up on the battlefield, wholly within 6 of the battlefield edge and more than 3 away from all enemy units. So as far as these replacement abilities go, this is not the best kind. You still have to roll the 3-up. You don't have to spend a command point, which I guess is nice. You do have to have a Dark Oath hero on the battlefield, so it would be nice, I think, if you didn't have that requirement and you could just take like 2 or 3 units of Dark Oath and then take this ability and you could have some extra chaff come on during the game. That would actually be a nice option, but it's very hard because you have to take that extra drop, and drops are very important at the moment. You have to take that Dark Oath hero, and pretty much all the Dark Oath heroes are bad. You have to, I think, to justify those units, you have to have a lot of Dark Oath, and you really have to be running actually the Dark Oath Horde, which might be their intention, but I think it cuts it off and makes it a bit too niche. I think battle profiles in general should be a little bit more plastic. As we saw in the Stormcast ones, they have abilities that are like pick a Ruination Chamber unit. That unit gets a 5-up ward. That's a really powerful ability. It favors Ruination Chamber, but it also doesn't lock your entire army into that very narrow thing. Something like this, it is pretty narrowing. You do have to take a very substantial amount of Dark Oath for this to be effective. And for it to be a really useful choice over something like God's Wrath Warband that is just useful all the time. Even when you're playing a fair amount of Dark Oath, I'm not certain you will use this, but replacement units are pretty good, so I wouldn't count it out. I just think it's a bit too specific. It requires too much investment from your list building. And I guess the 6-inch of the Battle Edge thing is a bit lame as well. That's one of the reasons it's not the best replacement things. Other armies that have replacements don't necessarily have to come in on the battlefield edge, but it depends. There's a mixed bag and sort of they run the gamut of different abilities. And I think if you're playing Slaves to Darkness, you don't necessarily want a really, really powerful replacement unit generator. Yeah. So the Dark Oath Horde. 3+ requires the hero. Means requires a bit too much investment / tax. If this didn't require the hero, in particular didn't require it on the battlefield, but just didn't require it at all, then I think this would be good and I would like it. The fact it's a 3-up is a bit rough. I'd almost prefer the command point cost instead of the 3-up. But being able to replace some of your chaff, just having like 2 units of Dark Oath and being able to get 2 units of Dark Oath back over the course of a game, that's kind of neat as an ability. even when compared to these sorts of things, because these things aren't very good. But overall, United in Darkness is garbage. The Spoilers is garbage. God's Wrath Warband is okay, if maybe a little bit generic. It doesn't feel like a playstyle. There is I guess there's an element of, if you're taking a lot of guys that are very durable, and your idea is to sort of defile these objectives, and over time you'll add up chip damage, I guess that's kind of a playstyle, and it's sort of a Nurgle-y playstyle, perhaps. So I could forgive it there. And this thing certainly leans into a playstyle, but it's too restrictive in that playstyle. It needs to sort of let you benefit from taking Dark Oath units, but not force you to take too many Dark Oath units. And I think the requirement to have a hero is too much of a requirement. They could just let you take it, and the cost is not the cost of paying the tax of having a hero. The tax is the opportunity cost of not taking God's Wrath Warband, right? I get 2 replacement units over the course of the game. I have to roll and do it on a 3-up in exchange for not having some other ability, right? These things shouldn't feel like you take them and then you have to pay an additional tax on top of them. That's sort of the point. The tax is the opportunity cost. All right, so marks. We get 1 point for each useful ability that fulfills a different purpose. So 1 point for God's Wrath Warband, 1 point for Dark Oath Horde. That's useful and fulfills a different purpose. These 2 are not useful, so we get 2 points there. Where did I put the marks up here? Put them at the start. So we're going to get 2 points for that. We're going to get 1 point for each useful ability that is interesting. I think God's Wrath is interesting enough. Yeah, I think God's Wrath and Dark Oath are interesting enough. They're just. This one's a little dull, but when I think about being able to play a really grindy game, a bit like if you wanted to play that Host of the Everchosen, where you had really big blocks of really durable, high armor save guys with a big rally, it made it a very grindy army, and God's Wrath is kind of a grindy sort of play style. And I think it's interesting because it's a certain sort of style. 1 point for each useful ability that could be used in multiple list builds. So this is the problem with Dark Oath. I don't think you can use it in like multiple list builds. I think you can really only use it in the Dark Oath Horde. It's a bit too restrictive because of that hero requirement. So I think they only get like 1 point here. And then -1 for each useless ability. We're getting -2 here because we've got 2 useless abilities. I know I'm being really harsh with the marking if they have useless abilities, because you don't gain the points in the first place and then lose the points for each useless ability. But I have to get across with the marking scheme that it is actually better to not even print bad abilities. That's maybe a controversial or contested opinion, but I don't think they should even bother with just having trash rules. They create a mental burden and a mental load that you have to remember rules and consider rules that are basically not worth considering. They just clutter up the book. They take up time. It's better if they don't include them. It's basically the same thing as saying when you're writing a book, you should edit, right? Just like a normal novel or something, if you have a bad chapter that the reader has to read through to get to more good content, you can't just say, oh, well, just pretend that chapter didn't exist and it's fine. It is actually annoying. The same way with all other content, having a whole bunch of useless stuff as well makes it worse. And you can take my videos as evidence of this, because I'm sure there's a whole bunch of useless stuff that makes my videos worse than they'd otherwise be. So what do we get in total? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -2. We're only getting 3 out of 9 for the battle formations. And I'll be back. Okay, I'm back and we're up to heroic traits. So first up we have Favored of the Pantheon. This unit can use the Eye of the Gods ability as if it were the end of the turn and it had destroyed an enemy unit this turn, and this happens in the deployment phase. So you just get to roll on the chart. And I think this would be a good ability. This would be a fun heroic trait, except that there are 2 dead options on the Eye of the Gods table. If you roll the 1, obviously nothing happens, and if you roll the 2, you're already at full health because this is happening in the deployment phase, so nothing happens. You do get that reroll, but even with a reroll, there is a 1 in 9 chance that nothing happens. And that's a horrible feeling. It might feel unlikely, but I played a lot of the previous edition. I really liked the Eye of the Gods mechanic, and I forced it a lot. So I would take Undivided Chosen with the banner that let you roll 2 dice and pick either option. I'm pretty sure that's what happened. And so it had the same probabilities. It had if you rolled a 1 or a 2, nothing would happen. And then any of the other results, you would get some sort of bonus. And rolling 2 dice means you have a 1 in 9 chance of both the dice being a 1 or a 2. That's exactly the same as what's happening here. And it happens a lot, right? The Chosen would roll at the start of the game. They get a free roll in 3rd edition, and they would fail it. You would get nothing. And you have to spend an enhancement to get this. It's a bit worse in the taking the banner to change the roll and it's still not mattering. It's like buying a reroll and the reroll doesn't do anything. You could have just taken the Mark of Khorne, the Mark of Nurgle, and had a guaranteed buff that was quite good, but instead you paid for a reroll on the chart, and the chart isn't likely to give you a good buff anyway. It was a very inefficient set of rules. This is better than that. There's still a high chance that you get some sort of useful benefit out of this ability, but it's unlikely to beat other things because of that unreliability. It has to be, the bonuses in the Eye of the Gods would have to be really good, or preferably they would have to remove those dead options for Favourite of the Pantheon to be the preferred pick. I think the other thing that's happening here is there's another option if you want your general to be quite fighty, because all of the bonuses in Favourite of the Pantheon are sort of combat bonuses, extra hit, extra rend. Having an extra ward is not necessarily a combat bonus, but as you look through most of the heroes in that are eligible to use the heroic traits, the ones that you're really looking at are probably the Chaos Lord on Karkadrak or the Demon Prince, and both of those are kind of fighty. They're going to be using that ward to stick it out in combat longer. So this is primarily a buff that improves the unit's ability to fight, and we have another buff that does something very similar. So this has to be better than that, and a lot of the time, this does nothing at all. Not a lot of the time. 1 in 9, it does nothing at all, which really sucks. So I'll just make a quick note, and then we'll move on to the next thing. We got Favourite of the Pantheon, roll on the Eye of the Gods, chance of failure, and overlapping ruin this. So I think this is quite fun, and I do think one of the problems with the Eye of the Gods chart is that there aren't many ways to roll on it before you kill something. So you want to get the buffs to help you kill things, but the main way that you get the buffs is by killing things. So you have to have already fought, and I think in a designer's mind, the idea that, well, I could have a unit of Chosen that has a 5-up ward and rend 3 and +1 to hit, that feels very overpowered. Like if I stacked all those effects up, but to get all of those effects, you would have to get 2 rends, 2 wards, and another one. So you'd have to roll on the chart 5 times, and you would have to get very good rolls. Even if you had options like Favourite of the Pantheon, and even if they had a built-in roll on their War Scroll, and even if you had something like Chaotic Conduit, which we no longer have, it would be very hard to stack all of these buffs on that unit quickly enough that you could use them before the end of the battle. And by the end of the battle, your units are really beat up, and you've invested so much into getting them these buffs. So I think sometimes designers overvalue the potential of stacking these buffs and really building a Death Star, and they undervalue sort of just giving out these things ahead of time. Like it's actually kind of not that fun that these things are locked behind having to win the game first. If you destroy your enemy's army, then you get a whole bunch of buffs. Well, that's neat, but now I don't need the buffs because I've destroyed my enemy army. So anyway, we've got Deathmonger. So once per battle, any combat phase, this unit can use 2 fight abilities this phase. After the first is used, however, this unit has Strike Last for the rest of the turn. So I think we've lost the strike first, strike last combo. I don't know that there's a reliable way to get strike first here. There is some ways to get strike first in the book. So you can fight in the strike first step and then fight in the normal step. But some of them are like Be'lakor's ability, and that happens in the opponent's turn, which makes it not as powerful. I do want to highlight that this ability literally doesn't function, like technically doesn't function, because there's no restriction on using 2 fight abilities in the same phase. There's a restriction on using 2 core abilities and a restriction on using 2 of the same abilities, but there's actually no restriction on using 2 fight abilities. So an ability that allows you to use 2 fight abilities, technically non-functional, but I think we all know what it's supposed to do. Yeah, this is generally a better version of Favored of the Pantheon. If you have a Demon Prince or a Chaos Lord on Karkadrak, which is going to do more for you? The chance at +1 to hit or an extra rend, or fighting a whole extra time? Especially keeping in mind that I think both of these units have crit mortals built in. The extra rend and the like +1 to hit are not as useful as getting more attacks, because you've got more chances of rolling those 6s and just getting the mortals straight out. So I'm pretty sure Deathmonger is just going to, if you're deciding between Favored of the Pantheon or Deathmonger, you would just take this pretty much every single time. There's very few situations where Favored of the Pantheon is going to be a more powerful option, even if it is maybe a more fun option, because you get to gamble on at the Casino of Chaos. I really like the Eye of the Gods as a mechanic. It's sad that it's not a good mechanic as well. It's like you can play fun or you can play good. And Deathmonger is not even that good. It's the kind of ability that looks really powerful. If you had like a Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon or a War Boss on Maw-Crusher, this would be a really powerful ability. But if you look through the eligible units, we don't have many generic heroes on big powerful monsters. The biggest thing we have, I think, is a Chaos Lord on Manticore, and I'm pretty sure that's not a very powerful unit in this edition anyway. All of the really big smashy guys like Archaon or Abraxia, or Abraxa, however it's said, those guys can't take the heroic traits. So this ability looks good in the abstract, but in practice, it's not that powerful. And it's sort of the same thing with Favored of the Pantheon. Giving one of these buffs to a Karkadrak or a Demon Prince is okay, but we don't have like a really powerful unit like a Vlozzard or a Maw-Crusher that would really benefit from getting those buffs. So that just leaves Radiance of Dark Glory. I'll just write some notes for this thing. Fight twice, once per game, strike last, as per usual. I don't need the name. Okay. Radiance of Dark Glory. Any hero phase. Declare pick each damaged friendly unit wholly within 12 of this unit to be the targets. I have a feeling there is a problem with this wording, because you have to pick damaged units, and it'd make sense that you would only bother healing damaged units, but part of the benefit of this ability specifically is things like Weird Flame and the Nurgle poison. You can have those things without having damage, and you get rid of them by healing. So if you have a unit that doesn't have any damage on it, but does have poison on it, does that count as being damaged? Can I use this ability on it? I think it needs like maybe an FAQ. It seems like you can't, and that's a really unusual effect. Anyway, the effect of the ability I should read. Roll a dice for each target. On a 3+, heal 1 the target. Heal 3 the target instead if it is a monster. This is a very small amount of healing, unless you're healing monsters. Heal 1 on a 3+ is almost nothing. Your guys often have 3 or 4 wounds, like Knights have 4 wounds now, Baron Guard have 5 wounds, Warriors have 2 wounds. There's a good chance that you will have a bit of damage sitting on your units, and this hits everything, but it's mostly only going to heal maybe 1 wound, right? So that's why this FAQ thing is quite important, because some of those effects that armies have are really powerful effects. Being able to spread poison across your army as Nurgle is a big deal for the Nurgle army. But if you can't pick the non-damaged units to heal, then it greatly reduces the impact that healing 1 is going to have in those situations, because you won't be able to pick those things. You're only actually going to get that 1 healing. And especially because you can't, like if you had a damage point and a poison point, you would have to probably heal the 1. Actually, I'm not certain. Actually, it depends on Nurgle's mechanics, and I don't know if they've changed. I think you might have to get rid of the poison first and then heal the wounds. So it might still work if the unit is damaged. I don't want to comment on that. I haven't read the Nurgle book yet. Healing 3 is a bit different. Healing 3 is quite useful. I don't love that you still roll and then you only get 1. Like it seems like you could roll a 3 up and then it would just heal 3. Or they could have made it just heal 1 without rolling. But for the monsters, it makes a little bit more sense. Healing 3 is quite valuable. It does work on other units. So the idea is you can't take this on Abraxia or Archaon or something, or Be'lakor, but you could take this on a different hero and put Be'lakor or Archaon or Abraxia. I have to check Abraxia. Sorry, I'm going to keep saying it wrong. It's either Abraxa or Abraxia. Abraxia. There we go. And where were we? Heroic traits. So yeah, you can put those bigger units near this guy and heal them up any hero phase. So it happens in both phases. Can be quite a lot of healing on a big unit like that, and one that is fairly durable. Things like Be'lakor, you can try and roll on the Eye of the Gods table. You could pair them with a Demon Prince or something. If you can get them the 5-up ward, they're still eligible to get buffs from other things like Eye of the Gods and like your Demon Prince. I think there is some kind of restriction on that, but I think it might just be matching marks. So you can get them the 5-up ward. They can actually be a fairly durable unit, and this healing can be quite impactful. So out of the 3, I expect this one is the most likely to have a place somewhere, but none of these are particularly powerful effects. I have seen some people talking about trying to use these big powerful heroes. You charge in your Be'lakor, deal a bunch of damage, hopefully kill something, and then you use things like Power Through to get your Be'lakor back to the hero that has Radiance of Dark Glory, and then you've got a 3-up chance of healing him 3 wounds. That's not terrible. You can also, obviously, you can use Power Through and then a Rally, so you can combine this with a Rally and potentially put quite a lot of wounds back on those big monsters. I guess the big problem for me is we don't have many monsters, and this feels like the ability, a bit like the spoilers up here, feels like this is designed for an army that can build into a monster mash. It doesn't have the same restriction about only using it on non-hero monsters, so it's much more applicable to Slaves of Darkness, but it still feels like we're in search of targets a little bit. Like you're not going to have a Radiance of Dark Glory on a hero and then put a Mindstealer Spheranx and a Fomoroid Crusher next to it and expect to get a lot of benefit out of healing those units, because I think in most combats where the Fomoroid or the Spheranx are, they'll just die. So Radiance of Dark Glory, I'm yet to be convinced that it's really powerful, especially depending on that FAQ, but there are situations where this is kind of useful. It's a bit more defensive as compared to Deathmonger or Favored of the Pantheon, so I think I like that it does something slightly different, but none of these are, in my opinion, none of them are great choices. Overall, they're quite weak, very understated effects that have very little impact on the game, largely because of the War Scrolls that we have in the book. These would all be much more impactful if we could put them on a very large, powerful monster. I was hoping that maybe when we got the Abraxia kit, we would get a generic Chaos Lord on big monster. We didn't get that. It's very unfortunate. I thought it would be replacing the Chaos Lord on Manticore, pretty much, that those would get squatted, and you would get to use this thing instead. And then you could use things like Favored of the Pantheon or Radiance of Dark Glory. It would heal himself because he's on a monster or something like that. But pretty much those things don't exist. And even like there are no monsters you can put this on except that Manticore, and the Manticore is pretty garbage. So very, it feels like they don't really understand the book they're writing these rules for, perhaps. Or maybe that's in their mind why they think it's balanced. But I feel like maybe Games Workshop spends too much time making sure their abilities aren't overpowered and too little time making sure their abilities are actually good. Radiance, 12-inch aura, 3+, heal 1, 3 if monster, every hero phase. Healing every turn rather than just your turn is very nice. I think all of these abilities should happen in both turns, just to sort of mitigate weirdness around double turns and things like that. Marks. All right. So we have 1 point for each useful ability. I suppose these are all technically useful. I won't say they're all, that any of them are useless. I know Deathmonger is technically doesn't work, but assuming that it does function, then it's fine. They're just not, they're not that exciting because of the book. We can only give them 2 points here because I'm pretty sure Favourite of the Pantheon and Deathmonger sort of do the same thing. And to the extent that Favourite of the Pantheon is defensive, because it gives you a ward maybe, Radiance is also defensive. So it's like we only have 2 abilities really, or 2 things you can do using your heroic traits. Maybe it would have been nice to have a different aura that helped buff units in a different way or something like that. Because at the moment you've got at least 2 of these choices feel very similar to one another. 1 point for each useful ability that is interesting. All right. I want to put the Favourite of the Pantheon in an interesting ability, but I think because of the way the Eye of the Gods works, the possible outcomes, it's just not that interesting. You only have a few options for it, and most of them are about as good as Deathmonger. Deathmonger could be interesting if you had better units to put it on, and then Radiance, I think, would be more interesting if you could build a Monster Mash list. So I'm not certain any of them I think are interesting. I'll give it a 1, because they're all slightly interesting, but if I had to go each one, I don't think any of them are interesting. And then -1 for each useless ability. We don't have useless abilities, so we'll get a total of 6 here. I think that's pretty generous. I'm actually a bit down on the Slaves to Darkness heroic traits. The problem is they're so close to being good and interesting. Just if we had a better unit to put Deathmonger on, or if Favourite of the Pantheon was a little bit more reliable, or if Radiance were maybe a little bit more healing on the non-monsters, or a bit more reliable, didn't have that 3+ requirement, and we knew that it worked on all of those things like Nurgle and Weird Flame and stuff like that, that would bump up the score a little bit. But the way it is, even the 6 out of 9 I think is pretty generous. All right, we got artifacts. Okay, Infernal Puppet. Once per battle, start of any turn, pick a visible enemy wizard within 24 inches of this unit to be the target. For the rest of the term, each time the target is picked to use a spell ability, inflict D3 mortal damage on the target as a reaction. If the target is destroyed by this ability, you do not resolve the effect of that spell ability. Okay. So there are a few things that work like this. I remember reading I think it's one of the Stormcast supplement guys, the Lord Exorcist, perhaps, that has an ability like this that works. I think it's just 1 spell per turn, but it's a 30-inch range, and does almost the same thing. This is not a very strong or reliable effect for a whole bunch of reasons. It feels like it could be good, and there are very narrow situations where it is actually very good. Obviously, if you're facing off against Nagash, this is a lot of mortal wounds. It shuts down a lot of casting. But in most situations, your opponent's only going to have maybe a single double caster that you can use this on. So at most, it does 2d3 damage, and your opponent gets to see the damage, so they could try to cast a spell. Let's say the best case scenario for you, they've got like a double casting dude that only has 5 wounds. They get to cast their first spell, and then maybe they only take one mortal wound from it, and so they know they're safe to cast the second spell. They like get information about how much damage they're taking at each spell cast. This might work a bit better if it was based on the power level of the wizard or something like that. The fact that it's 24 instead of 30-inch range is really awkward as well. It means it's very hard to use this turn 1. It's not impossible. If you're deploying 9 away, you can sometimes catch them out turn 1, but a lot of the time you won't be able to use this in turn 1. And then even when you do, it doesn't actually stop them casting the spell unless it kills the wizard. And a lot of the time that wizard is just going to have a lot of wounds, or because of the fact that they can plan out, like they can see the results of the first spell and how much damage they take, and then they can use another spell. Or even they could use a spell, then rally the wizard, then use another spell. So it's very unlikely to stop your opponent using a spell that's really important to them. Mostly what will happen is it might deal a couple wounds if they are really determined to use a specific spell. But if they don't really care about the spells, then they'll just choose not to use the spell. But in that situation, they care less about casting the spell than they do about taking D3 mortal wounds on the wizard. And more importantly, Slaves to Darkness have no way to follow up on this. They have no other like hero sniping things or anti-wizard abilities that can add more mortal damage to this. Once that wizard survives, it can just rally, it can just hide behind units, and this doesn't do anything else. So this is a very, very niche, very narrow tool, and most of the time it doesn't do anything. Then randomly you play against Nagash or maybe Teclis. Teclis has, I think, 4 casts. I haven't read that War Scroll yet, but you play against one of these wizards that has a ton of casts and it'll be much more relevant. But even against someone like Krondos, right? Krondos is a powerful wizard. He's a double caster with +2 to cast. At best, this just does 2d3 mortal wounds. So he takes like 4 damage. Okay? And then I guess he like rallies it, or they use Healing Storm because it's right at the start of the game and they don't have anything else to do with their priest. This is, in my opinion, a garbage artifact. But the upshot is all about artifacts are garbage. So who knows? Maybe you end up taking it just for that random situation where it is useful. So pick a Wizzy in 24. Takes 33 mortals each time it casts. It's once per game is the big issue. I think Soulblight, out of interest, Soulblight have an 18-inch range thing that does the same thing, but it's not once per game. It's just an aura of 18-inch. That's much better because then so long as you can keep your guy in range of the wizard, eventually that wizard kills himself. Or it just keeps shutting them down. Because you can threaten additional damage in the future, the ability gets a lot better. But because this ability is like one use, once their wizard survives, then it doesn't do anything. And their wizard is probably going to survive 2d3 mortal wounds. So in effect, it just doesn't do anything. So it's trash. All right. Passive, the Conqueror's Crown. Effect, subtract 5 from the control scores of enemy infantry units while they are in combat with this unit. So I think the way this used to work was like a 6-inch aura of models with a 1 or 2 wound characteristic didn't count for objective purposes. This is, I think, the biggest penalty going from that version to this version is that you have to be in combat. You can't just sit behind a screen. I think a lot of the time what you do is like put it on a Chaos Lord or something, put some warriors in front of them, and then your opponent would have a hard time actually getting to the Chaos Lord and killing him. So they wouldn't be able to take the objective off you with those 1 and 2 wound models. Subtracting 5 is a significant amount, but it's only from infantry, so you can't take anything off monsters or anything like that. And you don't have many high control score guys anyway. So again, if you're looking for targets or heroes to put this on, you could put it on a Karkadrak Lord or a Demon Prince, and those guys have, I think, control maybe 5 and 2. I have to double check the Demon Prince. I know he's not a monster, but I think he might have the 5 control score now anyway. So even if you are reducing their control score by 5, there's a good chance that your opponent has enough control score, particularly against that Karka Lord, that they keep the objective anyway. You can't really put it on units like a wizard, like the Sorcerer Lord, because you have to be in combat. So getting any of those units in combat just means they're going to die. It's actually, I find this is really hard to utilize. But there will be, I guess, there'll be these niche situations where they've got 2 units of Liberators on the point or something, and your Demon Prince can fly over and take it off them because they'll only have a couple control score. Although actually, I think Liberators in particular have a bonus to their control score, so even that probably wouldn't work. This is much more situational, I think, than it looks. Mostly because you have to be in combat. If it had a larger aura, if it had like a 12-inch range or something like that, then it would be quite a good ability. But because you have to actually get in combat with the unit, and it has this infantry restriction, it just means there's not that many situations where the 5 in the control score is going to matter. There are some, but it's not great. And it's also kind of boring. So Conqueror's Crown, control score, winning combat. Then we got the Realm Warper's Twist Rune. Once per battle, your hero phase. Pick a terrain feature within 12 of this to be the target, so not wholly within, which is nice for all the terrain stuff. Having wholly within is just a horrible idea. If the target does not have the obscuring terrain ability, it gains that ability until the start of your next turn, so you do get to keep it during your opponent's turn, which is nice because that makes obscuring relevant. Then roll a dice for each model, friendly and enemy, within 1 inch of the target. For each 5+, inflict 1 mortal damage on that model's unit. Okay, so there's a few nuances about the way this ability works that make it way trasher than it could be, and it's already pretty bad. So one of them is, it's not roll a dice for each model in a unit within 1 inch. It's roll a dice for each model within an inch. So if they have a unit of 30 guys next to a bit of terrain, but only 5 of their models are within 1 inch of the piece of terrain, you only get to roll 5 dice. So this looks like a horde breaking unit because it's a dice for each model and then on a 5+ inflict a mortal wound, but it's only the proportion of guys that are actually pretty much standing right on top of the terrain. A lot of the terrain is unstable, so you actually can't stand on a lot of the parts of a lot of the terrain in the game. So there's not going to be a lot of situations, and in some tables of terrain that I see, actually a lot of tables for tournaments, it's pretty much impossible to get more than a couple dice rolls out of this, let alone mortal wounds. So this effect is hard to use and hard to get a lot of value out of. If it had a big explosion range, if it was like pick a thing and then every model within 12 or every model within 6, 12's quite big, but every model within 6, then we might be talking about something useful, but it's very hard to get any real value out of this ability. Mostly what it does is gives you obscuring, and obscuring could be helpful against your enemy's shooting, but the fact that it's only 1 terrain piece, I think makes it a little bit difficult to use. You don't have to roll for the obscuring. I suppose that's nice. So you could keep this as, again, like a silver bullet against your opponent has some powerful shooting in their army. You don't want certain units in your army to get shot. So you take the Realm Warper's Twist Rune and try and use it, but you can't use it in your opponent's hero phase. So it's not like you pick the hero phase, then it lasts until your next hero phase. You have to do it in your own hero phase, which means if your opponent takes the turn, you can't protect your guys from being shot. You can only do it preemptively by using it in your turn and then hiding behind it, and then your opponent won't be able to shoot at them. It's so limited, and so situational of an effect, I think it's just garbage. Right? This thing is horribly designed. And the fact that those two uses are across purposes as well, like it non-bows with itself, you want to have your guys stand next to the terrain so they can't be shot, but then they take damage because they're standing next to the terrain. It hits friendly and enemy units. Why? Surely they could have made it modal so that you can either pick, and maybe it makes it obscuring, or maybe it blows up the terrain. I don't know, it twists it one way or twists it the other. But it's not. It like, if you want to get the benefit of the obscuring thing, chances are you're going to hit some of your guys with mortal wounds in the process. Or you might, I guess actually you won't inadvertently protect your opponent because you don't really have any shooting abilities. So I guess that's not a worry. But yeah, just this is a terribly designed ability on all accounts. And it's only range 12. This could have been board wide and it would not be broken. It just does so little of anything. So it's once per game, right? Once per battle. Why? This, you could let them use it board wide every single turn and it still wouldn't be overpowered. So once per game, pick a terrain feature and do nothing, I guess. I'm never taking it. It's just hot garbage. So marks, it's 0. We've got no usable abilities. 1 point for each, no useful abilities. 1 point for each useful ability that is interesting. No useful abilities. So 0, 0, 0, and then -1 for each useless ability. So we get actually -3. Overall score of -3. The artifacts in the book are actually terrible. You should delete the whole artifact section. And go back to the drawing board and write new ones. That is shocking. All right. Then we've got the spell lore. And the spell lore is a bit of a mixed bag. So we'll start with the unlimited spell, Smite Tongue Curse. In your hero phase, you've got a 5 casting value. Pick a friendly Slaves to Darkness wizard to cast this spell. Pick a visible enemy unit within 12. Then make a casting roll. If the casting attempt is unsuccessful or the spell is unbound, inflict D3 mortal damage on the caster. It's almost a bit weird that this is in the declare step, I guess, but you got to put it somewhere, I suppose. Even though unbinding happens, well, I suppose it's a reaction to declaring the spell. Anyway, you take D3 if you fail, and then the effect is inflict 3 mortal damage on the target. Okay. This is terrible basically every single way you slice it. It's an unlimited spell, but it's pretty situational. It's low range, so you already have to be in that situation that you are within 12 of an enemy unit. But the fact that it is almost as likely, remember when you cast a spell and your opponent tries to unbind it, it's like a 45% chance that they unbind it and a 55% chance that you're successful. So on even dice, you don't have bonuses to cast or penalties or any of that sort of stuff. This has almost the same amount of chance of hurting your guy as it does of hurting their guy. It's just that you inflict 3 damage on them and they inflict an average of 2 damage on you. This is not a lot of damage, right? The downside to upside ratio is very low. There are lots of ways to inflict 3 mortal damage on the target. You're better off probably summoning any endless spell, or maybe any of the ones that can shoot, right? If you're in 12 inches, you could cast Horrorghast or the Burning Head and shoot them with that endless spell, and you're probably more likely to deal damage and less likely to deal damage to yourself. So it's situational in that the distance is short, but it's also situational in there are other options for it, and it's also situational in you often don't really need to deal 3 damage to the target, right? Maybe if it was like, we're going to use Infernal Puppet and then we're going to try and finish off their wizard, but their wizard is going to be 30 inches away. It's going to be a lot further away than 12 inches from your wizard in your hero phase. There's very few situations where 3 mortal damage is going to be worthwhile with this kind of downside. If it didn't have the downside, it would still be a bad unlimited spell because it's such short range and you have to target an enemy unit. I'm really disappointed about this spell in particular. The other two are pretty good. But the whole lore, because it's all 12 inches, leaves your wizards with a lot of time on their hands. They're spending a lot of time not casting anything, or I guess they'll be casting endless spells, manifestations. But I think that's a real shame. They had at least 2 options I can think of that would have been really good to put in the place of the unlimited spell. They could put Chaotic Conduit so that you could roll on the Eye of the Gods table. That would fix one of the problems with the Eye of the Gods table, that it's hard to roll on that table before you get into combat, right? It's hard to get those buffs before you're basically winning the game and don't need the buffs. Chaotic Conduit is a nice way around that. Just lets you roll on that chart. If they're worried about how powerful the effect is, like, you could increase the casting value to like 9. So then all of your wizards could choose to try and cast a very hard to cast spell to try and roll on the table. But they're probably not going to. They're probably going to prefer to cast Demonic Speed or Binding Damnation when they have these options available to them. It just gives them something to do when they don't have anything else to do, which is the job of an unlimited spell. The other option would have been something like Demonic Power. Demonic Power was the sort of flagship, the stellar buff that we had in the previous book. It was on the Sorcerer Lord's War Scroll, and it gave you +1 to hit and wound. Very, very powerful offensive buff. It doesn't have to be +1 to hit or wound. It could be really any offensive buff at all, and it would be fine. If it was +1 to hit, that'd be fine. If it was crit 2 hits, maybe a bit less fine. A lot of the units in the book have crit mortals or crit auto wound, so you would struggle to find targets for crit 2 hits. If it was +1 attack, it would probably be a bit good. But there are lots and lots and lots of different ways that you can buff attacks without making it too powerful. Or you can buff lots of little things about the army. You could make it redeploy on a slightly higher number or something like that. There are so many options for spells. And instead we have this, which is boring, low power, and situational for the unlimited spell slot. This is a huge letdown. And it's very hard to find situations where you want to cast Spite Tongue Curse. So Spite Tongue, B3 mortals, 12 inch range, likely to hurt yourself. Where? As far as an unlimited spell, Spite Tongue Curse is terrible. There is going to be a narrow situation every now and then where maybe you really need those 3 wounds, but it's such a narrow situation. Okay. That doesn't mean the spell lore is bad. We've got Binding Damnation, 7 to cast. Pick a friendly Slaves to Darkness wizard to cast this spell. Pick a visible enemy unit within 12 of them and make a casting roll. The target has strike last until the start of your next turn. Okay. This is really good. I think 7 is an interesting value on spells like this, because when you're casting in your opponent's turn, you have -1 to cast when you use Magical Intervention. A 7 is not much harder to cast than a 6, but an 8 is significantly harder to cast than a 7. Really starts ramping up once you get above 7. So the fact that this is quite difficult to cast in your opponent's turn, there's a really significant chance of failure. I think having 7 on this is kind of important. A little bit the case with Demonic Speed as well. You're putting a lot of eggs in one basket if you're trying to cast Demonic Speed in the off turn, but we'll talk about that when we get to Demonic Speed. Overall, this is a really powerful spell. It's nice. It's not a problem that it's situational because it's not an unlimited spell, right? The job of the unlimited spell is to be able to cast it when you have nothing else to do, which is not what Spite Tongue Curse does. But Binding Damnation, this is fantastic. Just if you're in range to use it, you really want to use it. You need access to Strikes Last. This is a good way to have it. You can put it on a wide range of targets. You can use it in your opponent's turn. There are lots of situations where you start the turn in 12, both your turn and their turn. You start the turn just in 12 of an enemy unit. It doesn't care about whether they've charged or not or anything like that. It's just really valuable to have in your back pocket. And the big problem in the past with having Binding Damnation, because it did the same thing, the big problem was that you had to give your wizard a 12-inch range spell, and most of the time he would have nothing to do, because he wouldn't be within 12 of the enemy. The fact that now you know all of these spells and that you've got the other spell lore as well. The manifestation lore means your wizards have something to do. If we had a better unlimited spell, we'd definitely have something to do. So it's okay. It's not nearly as much of a penalty to have Binding Damnation in the spell lore as it was to have to pick it in the list building. So Binding Damnation, I think, is very good. Abilities like this are much better than they used to be. Damnation, 12-inch, Lights Last, CV7. Sort of good. Also works quite nicely with other effects in the army. We've got lots of fight twice stuff that makes you strike last when you do it. Giving your opponent strike last is really handy. It sort of synergizes with those effects, letting you hit them twice before they have a chance to fight back, at least in your own turn. Then we've got Demonic Speed. So casting value 7. It's got a range of 12, and you can target any Slaves to Darkness unit. You don't just have to target cavalry, which is how the old rule worked. For the rest of the turn, add 1 to the number of dice rolled when making charge rolls for the target to a maximum of 3. This ability is absolutely stellar. Increasing the charge distance is fantastic. I'm a tiny bit sad that it only lasts for the rest of the turn, so you can't then use it in your opponent's turn to make a counter charge. You have to do a magical intervention and cast it in your opponent's turn to give your guys 3d6 to charge, and then use another 2 command points to do the counter charge with that unit. So it gets very expensive, and Demonic Speed is a bit unreliable to cast in your opponent's turn because you're casting on a 7. So you have to get that 7 with the -1. But it is a very powerful effect. And these 2 abilities together make you not upset about the spell lore. These are both very powerful, very useful abilities. You always cast Demonic Speed. Very rarely is there a situation where 3d6 to charge is not useful. It's such a big bonus that often you can charge turn 1. You can use things like the Soul Scream Bridge to teleport your guys and then charge with Demonic Speed. You can't use it with the Gaunt Summoner, unfortunately. That one you have to use like the Karkadrak Lord and the Slanesh Mark or something like that, because this happens in the hero phase, and I'm pretty sure the Gaunt Summoner thing happens in the movement phase, but I guess we can check that when we get to it. Overall, Demonic Speed is absolutely fantastic. So you don't want a ton of wizards because your unlimited spell is really bad. You only need a couple of wizards. You need maybe like Be'lakor and a Sorcerer Lord so that you can cast Be'lakor's spell, which is quite good. You can cast Binding Damnation if you're in range to cast it, and you can cast Demonic Speed. Anything more than that, it's not clear that you really care about. You probably just use manifestations every now and then to fill in gaps. You might want to use, in combination with Demonic Speed, you might want enough casts that you could set up the bridge and cast Demonic Speed in the same turn. There's enough distance with both of those effects that you can set up outside of unbind range of enemy wizards. So if you've got a high drops army, you can often deploy your wizards very far away from theirs, outside of unbind range, and then you put the bridge up, and bridge is I think 18 away from your wizard at the front, but they have to be within 9 on the other end. And you can teleport the unit. It gets more than 18 inches because it goes from one side of the bridge to the opposite side of the bridge. So it moves almost 24 and then has a 3d6 charge. So if you can use your Nexus Chaotica and the Place of Power on the map, you can get Demonic Speed fairly reliably. You can get bridge fairly reliably if you're trying to mitigate that unbind. And you can charge a really, really long distance and catch your opponent off guard. In general, this is a really, really fun rule to have, and there are lots of little applications for it as well. Things like giving your Demon Prince 3d6 to charge so he can charge over enemy lines and just murk some enemy hero. Really useful. And the fact that this is an ability that targets friendly units gives you something to do in a place that Spite Tongue Curse and Binding Damnation don't. So altogether, the spell lore is pretty good, but Spite Tongue Curse is dragging it down a fair way. So Demonic Speed, 3d6 to charge on anything. Just that turn. Very, very good. So, marks wise, you get 0 to 2 points if the unlimited spell is not situational. I'd say it's very situational. 12-inch range inherently makes it a bit situational, but then the fact that if your opponent has any unbinds available or your wizard's fairly damaged, you won't want to risk the D3 models yourself. You really need a situation where your opponent has a unit in range that you care about dealing 3 models to. I just think it's really situational. 1 point for each useful spell, so they get 2 points here. It's neat. You get 1 point for each useful spell that fulfills a different purpose. So we get 2 points here as well. Binding Damnation and Demonic Speed are definitely different purposes, and they're both very good spells. 1 point for each spell is interesting. I think Fights Last, Fights First stuff counts as interesting. It lets you do something that your army otherwise couldn't do. It has some neat synergy with those other Fight Twice abilities. Demonic Speed is very, very interesting. It's very fun to use. Everyone loves charging with 3d6 when you've got it. And then -1 point, we do get -1 here for Blight Tongue Curse. And then we do have we don't have a Prayer Law, so I think we double the points here. Just to make the marking scheme work out. So overall, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then -1, so 5. So we get 10 out of 18 for our spell law, which is pretty good. I think maybe underrates it a little bit just because Spike Tongue draws the law down so much. Actually feels kind of nice using these. It's a bit sad that we lost Cabbalists and we lost the 3d6 cast thing. Now we only have that Nexus Chaotica, which I guess gives us +1 to cast every now and then, but is nowhere near as good as the old 3d6 to cast heroic action. But certainly very good spells here when they go off. Prayer Law, I'm pretty sure we don't even bother with that. There is a prayer, but it's only on a War Scroll. And then we got battle profiles. I might leave this to the end in other books, but I know a little bit about the Slaves to Darkness battle profiles. So I'll just talk about them briefly, and then I'll call it for the video, and we'll do another video for part 2. All right. So one thing with Slaves to Darkness is a lot of the heroes are locked into Warriors of Chaos, Monster, and Ruinous Champion. The Ruinous Champions are the Centurion Marshal, the Exalted Hero of Chaos, or the Overraid Myrmidon. Those guys are all like a little bit fighty, but they're not. None of them are worth taking, I would say. They're kind of fun. I think all of them are cool. They certainly have interesting models. I really like the models for all 3 of them, but I don't think there's a really good reason to take any of them. Especially the Exalted Hero of Chaos lost the most fun thing about him, which was that he got to roll on the chart at the start of the game. That didn't make him good, but did make him a bit of fun. And you could take the Exalted Hero and give him Favored of the Pantheon and roll twice on the chart if you really, really like the Eye of the Gods, but you can't stack the Eye of the Gods very easily now. Anyway, what I'm getting at is the guys that can take the Warriors of Chaos, these extra options of taking a monster or a Ruinous Champion are not really useful options. You don't really want to utilize those. Your monsters are pretty bad. You generally don't want to take them. I suppose the Sphinx or the Fomoroid you might include. They're like 150 or 170 points, so it's nice that you can include one of them, but it doesn't help you. You're not really struggling to find a spot to put them. You're mostly struggling to find a reason to bother including them at all. All right. The big problem is that it's hard to take Dark Oath units or Furies. All of these Warriors of Chaos guys are expensive. They're all the like 3-up armor save, the black armor guys. So that's like Warriors, Knights, Varangard type of units. Chosen as well. So they're all expensive, and you really do want some chaff in the army. So if you want chaff, then you have to put it in either a Dark Oath regiment, and the Dark Oath units, all the heroes for Dark Oath kind of suck. So you have to pay a tax of buying a Dark Oath hero that you don't really want. You could take one of the named characters. So Abraxia, Archeon, or Be'lakor all have any Slaves to Darkness. that's kind of neat, except in the current season, if you're putting your chaff in your general's regiment, and these guys are all war masters, so they will force you to take their regiment as the general's regiment, it gives your opponent an easy battle tactic. So there's a little bit of a downside there. And the other option is the Demon Prince. And I think the Demon Prince is good. I just think he's a little bit overcosted. He doesn't unlock enough stuff. He gives some benefits to your units, gives some pluses, but he doesn't do anything fundamentally different. The same way, like, for example, Be'lakor gives you some really unique abilities, and Archaon makes the army play very, very differently. I haven't had much time looking at Abraxia, but I suspect it's the same for her as well. But the Demon Prince is very generic. He just gives your guys some either gods buffs and is a decently fighty hero. For 280 points, it's hard to justify paying that tax just so you can put your chaff in a different battalion than your generals. So you take like a Demon Prince and then maybe like a Chaos Sorcerer Lord, and you would make your Chaos Sorcerer Lord the general and put the chaff in the Demon Prince's unit, right? So overall, there's a little bit of awkwardness when it comes to their regiment stuff, mainly because I think it would be nice to be able to take some Dark Oath units in the regiments with the Chaos Lords, or the Chaos Sorcerers, for example. It's just a bit weird that you have to go out of your way to take this like lesser hero, so that you can take weak chaff units. Having to pay a hero tax for chaff kind of sucks. But that's about it. I think most of the good units in the book aren't locked behind bad heroes. So the good units being things like Varangard and Chosen, Knights, all of those are generally Warriors of Chaos units. They're very easy to access. It's really just those chaff units that you want to access that you're struggling with. And I think most of the good heroes have good selections. So like Be'lakor is very good. He can take any slaves. Archaon, any slaves. Just a bit of that frustration with some of those heroes being locked to Warriors of Chaos. All right. So I'll just make a note. Many heroes, Warriors of Chaos stuff. Hard to find slots for chaff. So you can only lose points in the battle profile section. You get up to -2 for being forced to take bad hero to access useful units, or actually I don't need that restriction. And you get up to -2 for having bad regiment options on good heroes. In general, I think it's just -1 here. So it's a bit hard to find room for your chaff, but you don't really have too bad an option on your good heroes, and most of your good units you can take. So we'll just give them -1 just for that chaff thing. If they just moved some of the if they let some of the Dark Oath units be eligible in more of those mid-tier heroes like the Chaos Lord on Karkadrak, I think that would fix this problem. I don't think that's necessary for the functioning of the book. My understanding is that those Dark Oath heroes really only exist if you want to play the Dark Oath Horde type army. They shouldn't have this like weird tax that you have to buy one of those Dark Oath guys that do almost nothing, just so that you can take chaff. You shouldn't be paying tax to take chaff. All right. So I guess we should add up the total score for the faction rules. We got 5, 8, 14, down to 11, 21, and then -1. So you get 20. 20 out of 54. All right. So that's pretty harsh as a score, because overall I'm quite happy with Slaves to Darkness. But part of the issue is that there's still a lot of junk rules. Obviously, that Spike Tongue Curse is letting us down. The bad artifacts, really, really frustrating in the book. When you're looking around for artifacts, you have no options at all. The heroic traits are okay, but kind of meh. The battle formations, there's like one that's okay. There's some easy wins here as well. Like if you just had a battle formation that's like at the start of your turn, pick 3 units and roll a d3, one of those units, like randomly determine one of those units they get to roll on the Eye of the Gods chart or something like that. That'd be really fun. I want to roll on the Eye of the Gods chart, and there are ways like what I just mentioned, randomizing the unit that gets it to stop someone building up a super Death Star unit and piling on all these buffs on one thing. But even if they do that, they're investing so many rules from their army into this one unit. I think it's actually not that powerful of a thing in practice. But yeah, lots of ways to make easy wins. And they just didn't take any of them. There's lots and lots of junk rules still, sort of for no reason. I think maybe I'm a bit harsh on the battle traits. It's because of that Mark of Tzeentch and the Mark of Slaanesh. I think that they're letting themselves down. Yeah, again, if they fixed up just a few things, the score would skyrocket. But every little thing has some kind of problem. So I'm actually kind of happy with the way the marking scheme has worked out. I think this provides a good overview of which bits are better designed than other bits. And it is pretty harsh. I want it to be pretty harsh because I'm pretty frustrated with the amount of junk rules that Games Workshop keeps making up. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for the faction rules. We'll move on to units in the next part of the video, which I'll probably film another day. All right, I hope you enjoyed it. Like the video, do all the things, give me a donation, whatever it is, and I'll leave it there.